Hey, McGraw.
The Brett Kavanaugh bump, is it still there? And how big is it?
Well, it's small, but it's noticeable. We've got a new ABC poll out shows the bump in two ways. One is when this famous generic vote, we ask people, you're likely to vote Democratic or Republican for the House. Back in August, Democrats had a 14-point edge. This morning, they have an 11-point edge. That's still very significant, but it's smaller. Trend line creeping up toward the Republicans. President Trump's personal rating also creeping up. He was at 36% back in August. He's now at 41%. But to put that in historical perspective, at 41%, that would be the lowest rating that an incumbent president has ever had going into the first mid-year election after his election, the lowest since 1946 when Harry Truman faced the voters and the beginning of modern polling. So there is some good news for the president, but his numbers still are at historic lows.
We keep hearing about this generic ballot. Explain that, because districts being what they are, they're all gerrymandered in one way, shape, or form. And while a lot of Democrats in a Democratic district might be voting for President Trump, what does that mean for the rest of the districts, and how accurate are those generic pollings?
Well, you're absolutely right. They're a very limited metric. Democrats waste a lot of votes in big city districts. Republicans have many more districts where they're competitive. So these generic numbers are of limited value, but historically they've been pretty good predictors. Because the Democrats waste a lot of votes, and because Republicans have commandeered the state legislatures and gubernatorial seats in the last generation, and so they've been in charge of redistricting, Democrats, most political analysts figure the Democrats have to have a margin of at least 5 or 6% in the generic vote in order to win the House because of these other impediments. And right now, as I say, it's an 11-point edge. Now, that's a little high. The national average is closer to about 7. So that tells you the House is going to be very close. But everybody I talk to are predicting a small Democratic majority in the House, somewhere between 5 and 10 seats. In the Senate, it's a different story. The Republicans are almost certain to keep control of the Senate and perhaps even pick up a seat or two. They're ahead in North Dakota, where a Democratic Senator, Heidi Heitkamp's fighting for her life, as voters in St. Louis know that the race there in Missouri with Senator McCaskill is very, very close. Democrats had hopes to win seats, Republican seats in Tennessee and Texas. Those hopes are fading. So the most likely outcome 3 weeks from now is a small Democratic edge in the House with Republicans keeping control of the Senate.
I know there are people who love Trump, the people who despise Trump, and I don't know what number of those people in the middle that are busy living their lives, going to work, dropping their kids off at school. They're going to look up and say, you know what, the economy's going great. There's peace around the world for the most part. The man's done pretty well for the last 2 years. My taxes are down. I'm going to vote for him because, well, I think things are going well.
There's no doubt that is a very significant theme in American politics today. The economy is always the most important issue because it affects people's pocketbooks directly. You know, North Korea is an abstraction. The economy's not. Our polls show that of all the issues we test, voters are most favorable toward the Republicans when it comes to the economy. And that is particularly true, McGraw, among male voters. They clearly are weighing the economic successes of Trump more heavily. But for female voters, now this is marginal, right? Not all men, all women. But women tend to be more focused on the president's personal characteristics and some of his personal failings. So there's an astounding gender gap. In this generic vote, men favor Republicans by 2 points, but women favor Democrats by 22 points. We've never seen a gender gap this big. And at the core of it is these personal concerns. Is this man a good role model for my kids? Is it going to keep us safe? The sense of instability and intemperance weighs more heavily on female voters, whereas the economic success is helping the Republicans and the president with male voters.
You know, closer to home, Claire McCaskill, Donald Trump won this state overwhelmingly. I think it was 58, 59% of the vote. Claire's got it 50-50. So she's doing better than Trump did 2 years ago.
Well, that's true, and that's a very clear pattern that we see in off-year elections. The historical trend is very clear. In the first off-year election after a president's elected, the opposition party always does well. The president picks up scars, but the main thing is that someone like Trump pulled in a lot of marginal voters. He stirred up a lot of excitement. A lot of people who normally don't vote were attracted to Trump and went out and voted. The exact same thing happened with Ronald Reagan in 1980. 2 years later, his party lost 26 seats in the House of Representatives, not because a lot of people who voted for Reagan decided to switch parties. It's because they didn't vote at all. And this is the big problem that the Republicans and Trump are having, intensity. There's no doubt that 2 years ago, Trump won in part because his voters cared more about it. Clinton's voters were tepid, they were pallid, many of them didn't bother to vote, whereas Trump people made sure they did vote. And if you look at the intensity question here, there's a marginal advantage to the Democrats. And again, particularly among women, 70% of women tell us it's important to vote in the fall, only 62% of men. And given the margin that Democrats hold among women, that intensity factor could be critical in helping to elect a Democrat like Claire McCaskill and Democrats in key House races around the country.
Stay tuned. 3 weeks from tomorrow. Stephen Roberts, thanks for checking in.